this all going?
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We're starting up our series of talks again. I'd like to introduce our next two speakers. There's Jordan Jones-Brewster, who's a Brooklyn-based narrative designer, game designer, and writer, whose work focuses on dissecting interpersonal relationships. And I hear there's a rumor that they're also a karaoke wizard, so I'm not sure if we're going to see any of that today, but you never know. And also there's Carol Mertz, who is an independent game designer, executive director of indie game conference Pixel Pop Festival, and MFA graduate at NYU Game Center. She makes games, experiences, art, and bad jokes, which I'm particularly looking forward to. So please welcome Jordan Jones and Carol.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Like he said, I am Carol Mertz,
And I'm Jordan Jones-Brewster.
and we are both. Let me put my coffee down really quick. We are both MFA graduates from the NYU Game Center, which is where we worked on this project together. So we're gonna spend a little bit of time breaking down the process and everything. But together, the two of us are 1/3 of the team. So we had a team of 6 working on this project.
Yep.
All right, so what is We Should Talk? This game is a short-form narrative game that makes players think carefully about the words they choose. And we're going to explain why in just a bit. So the key to We Should Talk is the sentence spinner, which you can see here. It's a unique narrative choice mechanic that lets players express themselves in a way that most games just don't allow. The sentence spinner lets players craft sentences in response to the in-game characters. By carefully choosing their words in this way, oh, shoot, sorry. I'm trying to scroll because I've got my notes. I didn't mention I have a cold and I am totally out of it today, so bear with me. There we go. So by carefully choosing their words in this way, players discuss ongoing problems about life and romance with their partner over text messages, as you can see here. Meanwhile, they're also chatting with friends and strangers at their favorite local bar about what's on their mind. The combination of words they choose affects how genuine of a connection they have with their partner, which of the many stories they discover, and whether their relationship can survive the night. So throughout this session, we aim to explore why and how we came up with this unique choice mechanic, the sentence spinner, and how we tackled the challenges around designing for modular choice in this way. I'm actually really excited that we're following Kate's talk because I feel like this is kind of a spiritual successor to her approach to romance in games, and like this is sort of our way of handling that. So for context, we'd like to start out by showing you the trailer for We Should Talk so that you can see the sentence spinner in action and have a better idea of what we're going to be discussing throughout this session. No, it's all good. Thank you. Okay. Oh, no, it's all good. Oh. Computers are so cool. That's my bad joke for the presentation. You're welcome. Mm-hmm. It's not a good joke. Sorry. Okay. All right. So our initial goal with We Should Talk, as you could see from some of that trailer and some of the dialogue in that trailer, I'm looking for my mouse now so that I can actually scroll. Our initial goal with We Should Talk was to create a game that offered a more human, less, oh God, sorry. Where is my mouse? Well, I'm trying to see the speaker notes, sorry. Okay. Oh, I see, okay, all right, cool. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Our initial goal with We Should Talk was to create a game that offered a more human, less transactional approach to relationships, similar again to what Kate was talking about with the whole giving an egg every day for the rest of your life in order to find your wife. That's not how real life works. And so we were looking for a way to actually create that experience that mirrors real life, that mirrors actual relationship building, rather than trying to say or do or give the quote-unquote right thing. We were looking for an experience that feels true to the nuances of actual relationship building. And in doing so, it wasn't our intention to ask players what it means to be the perfect partner, because there is no such thing. We rather wanted to ask them to look into how small changes in the way that you approach conversations can impact the bigger picture. And then we hope that they would take that information and take that context and replay and experiment to see how different choices might impact the various conversations and outcomes that they could have through that playing experience. So like I said, we feel this is a much more natural approach to choice design that actually helps us channel those feelings that we get during real world interactions. Like, we're both kind of like socially awkward humans, and when we have tough conversations, or really any conversation, we feel like we're like constantly analyzing the things that we could or should say, and I think a lot of us feel that way. Sometimes the goals that we have affect the available options that we have in our own minds, and sometimes when we act or speak too quickly, we say things that we regret or could have worded more carefully, and we feel like maybe we have impacted our relationships in a way that we should have had a little bit more care toward. So for example, when your ex suddenly comes to town and begins reflecting on the end of your relationship, what do you say? Who do you blame? Do you take responsibility or do you blame it on them? The modularity of choice that we implemented in We Should Talk draws a lot of inspiration from relationship psychology, actually. So it encourages players to slow down and consider the impact of something as simple as deciding whether to say I, you, or we. We also wanted to capture the feeling of texting someone you care about. So as we all know, seeing all of the predictive text in our emails and in our text messages, predictive text can often sort of take away some of the agency that we feel like we have over our own options, or sometimes even suggest we say or do something that we may not have said or word it in a different way than we would have worded it ourselves. But We Should Talk actually embraces that intervention of technology, acknowledging that that's a part of our lives now. And so sometimes we, as the designers, guide players into a slew of unexpected places, occasionally even leading them into the very uncomfortable conversation they were trying their darndest to avoid. But that's part of what life is, right? Like we can't predict how the things that we say or the things that we do are going to affect the person we're talking to, and sometimes that happens.
So for the sake of creating a more fruitful and impactful narrative, we wanted the characters of We Should Talk to represent the diverse multicultural backgrounds of the team while also representing differing levels of intimacy. Our goals were to allow the players to choose their own path, whether that means enacting a situation that feels true to life or allowing them to explore the idea of being the kind of person they never thought they could be. We chose to have all the conversations represent varied levels of intimacy to encourage players to use We Should Talk as something of a relational playground, giving the opportunity to explore tone and self-expression and different kinds of experience through conversation. So we have Steph, the friendly bartender, Dante, the reappearing ex, and Sam, your codependent partner, who not only are all modeled and inspired by the experiences, nationalities, gender, and sexual identities of the members of the team, but also different kinds of relationships, conversations, and level of closeness to the players. So we designed our sentence spinner to allow the player to have flexibility to explore those varying relationships. And part of the development process of the sentence spinner was the custom dialogue parser created in Unity that team member Jack Schlesinger developed. This parser gives us a way to lay out our dialogue in multiple choice options. Plus, we even call triggers that unlock specific conversations, choose narrative variables, and character model expression changes as well. And through this system, we were careful to make sure that players not only have one obvious narrative choice, but rather a myriad of choices at once for every response, potentially guiding the dialogue in a number of different directions, while also allowing the story and the characters to react to their decisions in a meaningful way. And you can see this all come together in spreadsheets. Don't we all love spreadsheets? There's some narrative design.
We love spreadsheets here. This is wordplay. Come on.
Here's where we control all the physical expressions for the models of the characters, trigger specifically themed conversations, and adjust the variables we use to determine the endings in our game. And I'll explain the endings a little bit further a little bit later. Most importantly, this is where we write all of our dialogue and choices. So the main challenge writing these choices is that the possibility space is so large that writing each option kind of becomes a puzzle. Most of the dialogue options have the 3x3 structure that you see here. As a result, we weren't writing 3 dialogue options, but at least 9 possible fragments of what would really be 27 or more different sentences that could become the final option that you choose. In just this introductory conversation that you see here, which is the first conversation in the game, there are 240 possible choices that you can give.
Think about that. And as writers, think about the idea of putting together literally 240 different sentences, ultimately,
For
in one choice.
Just 2-minute conversation total. Because of that, we often found ourselves spending a lot of time not only wondering, does this move the story forward the way that I want it to, but also, can we actually write 27 different responses to the statement that all make grammatical sense? That turned this process to be more of puzzle writing for the sentence spinner for every choice. Each option is a small addition to the sentence spinner that could drastically extend how long it would take to make all the possible choices make sense. So in addition to that, the actual content of writing these choices also proved to be a challenge. We Should Talk was designed to simulate the experience that predictive texting provides, as Carol said earlier, which meant that it was also important for us to use the slang and shorthand writing that you would have when you text someone that's important and close to you. But as a result of that, if one choice doesn't quite make grammatical sense, or if there's one piece of slang that doesn't resonate with the player, maybe it's from a different generation, maybe it's something different, all that can completely take the player out of the experience, which meant that a large amount of testing was required to make sure that the player has the choices that make as broad sense to all of them as possible.
Yeah. And just like as an anecdote, Jordan was the primary writer on the project, but he and I shared the writing responsibility a lot of the times. And even just from our cultural differences and our backgrounds, we had a lot of conversations about, well, this may not be something that I would say, but this is something that you would say. So like, how do we come to terms with, like, who are we writing this for? How are we writing it? And in what cultural dialect are we writing this in?
Yeah. So as you can imagine, with all of that, all the possible conversations made testing for this extremely difficult. And testing one conversation could take hours. With only a team of 6 members, playtesting became a huge part of all of our responsibilities. This way of writing also made it a challenge to prevent overscoping the narrative as well. With so many ways of responding to each choice, there could be nearly countless narrative branches and threads that could offer the player more backstory, interesting story paths, and unexpected conversation that would add a lot of depth to the overall experience. We often found ourselves with the opportunity to follow interesting narrative threads that arose from conversations that we were having that were captivating, but interesting threads didn't always make up for the development time necessary to write them. There are many moments in developing where pulling on a thread or a branch created a captivating conversation that made the story better, but probably far more often, there are times where a similar thread led us to wasting loads of time writing choices that we simply couldn't come up with a solution to write 27 ways. Keeping in mind the time and workload necessary to write, as well as our goal to make this a very short and bite-sized experience, you often see choices like this. So here, the game uses the sentence spinner to not only provide players with a direction to take the conversation, but also information about the characters that might not show up in their narrative route. For example, here you have the main character talking to Dante. He says he wasn't expecting to see you, leaving you with the option to say something along the lines of, I wasn't expecting to see a Michael B. Jordan wannabe, or it's not every night that I come across an ex. These choices tell you that he's your ex-boyfriend and that you have an established relationship with him without going through the specific routes to discover all of that information. While branching in the story in this particular choice is fairly explicit, talking about your old relationship or teasing an old friend, passively moving along the conversation, we wanted to make some choices reflect more of a it's not what you say, it's how you say it kind of philosophy. Now here, on the other hand, we have Jimmy, who's a complete stranger to you, who clearly mistakes you for a Tinder date and approaches you saying, hey, you're too hot to handle, right? Which leads you to possibly say, sorry, Jimmy, I think you got the wrong person, or not in this lifetime. Looks like you got stood up. All of these choices were meant to show a different way to turn someone down when they approach you at a bar. Whether it's addressing the silly screen name that he mistakes you for, or just telling Jimmy that he got stood up, they take different tones that allow the player to express themselves. None of these options are particularly right or wrong. They're all different enough to let the player feel like they can personalize their choice while still kind of covering the same sentiment. However, depending on how the player handles that response, the routes from this choice branch off pretty drastically. Some paths result in a conversation that leads to Jimmy hitting on you, while others lead to Jimmy just venting, talking to you about his dating problems, his family problems, his life problems. And these all represent varying responses to that kind of small interaction at a bar could happen. We wanted players to feel like the branching that happens within these conversations is a result of how they express their feelings and not whether or not they express the right feeling. And now that we've spent so much time giving the player power to craft these relationships in the way that they want, we designed the endings to remove that agency. Like we mentioned before, there aren't always right answers to a conversation. Sometimes the choices you have available to you in a conversation are a result of the actions that you've already made. We took that idea into consideration when designing our 9 endings. And mild spoiler alert, we're going to take a deep dive into one of these endings and talk about how we handle our endings. So just keep that in mind as we go forward. So, for example, here you see one of our ending messages. Throughout the game, you've communicated negatively towards Sam, your partner. You've been distant, uninterested, perhaps rude to her. Maybe you don't care about what she's saying. Maybe the people in the bar stimulate you more. Either way, you've been a jerk to her. As a result, the only thing you can say here when she's saying, I know we have some problems, but let's figure it out, is, I don't love you anymore. To get this ending, players intentionally had to make aggressive or mean choices in their conversations with Sam and the others. When playtesters got this ending, however, they had to actively make bad choices and mean choices to all the people in the bar. And when we took the option to backtrack those choices away and give them no agency, they always expressed guilt over the way they've treated her, especially now that they couldn't turn back. This is absolutely in line with our design goals, and quite often we find ourselves dealing with the repercussions of our past actions. This is how we aim to simulate that in We Should Talk altogether.
So even though we may lock players into certain endings, we actively avoided designing randomness into our sentence spinner. Because when people see it, a lot of times they're like, oh, it's a slot machine. We absolutely didn't want having serious conversations to feel like you're trying to pull the lever on a slot machine. We didn't want intimate choices to feel like a roulette or a gamble. So that said, when we think about like where the future of this mechanic could go, that is one option. We see a possible future that could like explore a lot of that space where designers explore the risk versus reward in sometimes randomly selected choices. For example, a game like Clue actually already uses this randomness and modular similarity to create procedurally generated narrative outcomes and scenarios. As we're all familiar with, or probably familiar with, having played that game for most of our lives, that's an example of this exact same kind of modularity. We just have never seen it in a video game like this before. So we could see this used to an even greater depth with other games, whether random or not. Similarly, modular choice, like in this vein, could be used to select action mechanics, generate character backgrounds or narrative scenarios, or any of a number of other things. The use of the mechanic could be core to the full game, the way that it is in We Should Talk, or it could be used as like a sort of surprise to add a fresh sense of depth and player agency. We don't think this is going to be the last time that we see a mechanic like this, but also it's really hard to predict how other designers might find value and opportunity in this level of modularity and modular choice. We see so many opportunities here for adding depth of choice, both narrative and otherwise, and are really excited to see how other designers might choose to use this kind of mechanic. And that is our deep dive into We Should Talk. We are more than happy to answer questions after. So if you want to come find us later this afternoon, we would love to talk to you about our design process. And feel free to visit us online at our website or at our Twitter. We are more than happy to answer questions online as well.
Yeah. Thank you. We'll be in the Learning Center this weekend, so you can actually play We Should Talk in all of its 9 endings. And thank you for having us.